What's up, guys? How are you? Welcome. Welcome back. It's me, your boy Hebot. And today, I'm going to do a little different type of video. I don't really do this type of video, but I think it was fitting since I've always told you guys that I am a really big Sega fan. And I think by me saying that, maybe I should run down a little bit down memory lane with a little history in celebration of today's birthday for the Dreamcast. So happy birthday, Sega Dreamcast, as you see there. The little console that not only evolved gaming, but it did so many things that have never been done before. And here is what the controllers look like, obviously. It did so many things that have never been done before that a lot of consoles at this point now, as we know with gaming, has followed suit. And it did things that no one thought even possible at the time that it did it. It was a very advanced and ahead of its time system, which, to be honest, is really sad that real gamers, like I consider myself, couldn't save it. And if you're wondering why, well, stay back, relax, stay tuned, and you'll find out why. As Hebot gives you a memory lane retro going back to my memories with Sega Dreamcast and what went on in that era and what I saw from my own personal experience in many, many places. Guys, stay tuned. This should be a fun and exciting one. Stay tuned. Hey guys, welcome back, and we are here in front of the display of Sega Dreamcast. And I want to go back and start talking about why I felt that doing something like this would be kind of cool, because many people do not really understand that that little console right there is basically the birth father of the other two consoles that you see next to it in the Xbox family. And a lot of the reasons why Sega Dreamcast was basically the first console in history, right, that actually started the movement of creating a console, right, that created a console that, and let me see if I turn this off, it'll give me better lighting, of creating a console. There we go. That's a little bit better. That created Sega Dreamcast was a console that was created that started the movement of consoles being built with actual arcade motherboards. In this case, it was the Naomi board, the Naomi 1 to be exact. Albeit it had less memory, but there was ways around that with expansion packs and the memory units that the Dreamcast had available. Now, this was one of the first consoles in history to house a existing arcade board at the same time, coinciding with the arcade board that just came out maybe a few months before it, which ran a lot of the Sega arcade games at that time. Games such as House of the Dead 2 and games such as Dynamite Cop, which were the sequel to Die Hard Arcade, which was on the Saturn. And also, it ported masterpiece fighters like Power Stone and a rebooted version of Soul Calibur, which was originally running on the System 12 arcade board, I believe, based off the PlayStation 1 hardware in the arcade, which was leaps and light years away to what that board was able to push on the PS1 and in the arcade. So, as you see here, the Dreamcast was also the birthright of iconic characters such as Beat and Ooh La La, with games like Jet Set Radio and Space Channel 5. New iconic characters that are known iconically today because they were born and birthed by the Dreamcast. It was a system that started a lot of new IPs for Sega in that era, new arcade IPs, and poured over a nice amount of our, ports of existing arcade games that were very new in the market then at that point. And it also brought over new existing IPs that were created or that were refined for companies such as Capcom and Namco, right? And they brought out new versions of games like Resident Evil, which was completely exclusive, and it was called Code Veronica. The Sega Dreamcast was a console that was only about $200, which also made it the first console in history to not only be the most powerful console ever created, but the most powerful console ever created at an affordable price. Not to mention that it continued in the tradition that was started by the Ultra 64 with housing a 4 layout arcade port for 4 controllers to give you couch co-op playability. It also was the first console to include a 56K modem in the Americanized version of the system so that you can play online gaming right on the system, which started the actual movement that we have today for the big gaming space that we see with streamers and streaming games and competitive gameplay via online. It was the first console that housed a very small chassis that was really, really cramped and compact, but yet had a kick. The console never suffered from overheating issues. It did suffer from a weak lens that would kind of die out for after a while and wouldn't read titles that a lot of times had to be refurbished and fixed. The Sega Dreamcast was also the first console to house these memory units that went on the controller, where they had an expansion port right in the center called the VMU, Virtual Memory Units, that look like small LED screens where you can actually play little mini games that were inside of the actual big games that you actually downloaded into there to play on the go. And it did ingenious things like give you the ability to connect a microphone so that you can interact with your games with you play via the mic with games like Seaman. It also did something that was to this day never replicated in any way. Like I said, it was the very first console to do something that was still not replicated to this day, which was the ability that through that VMU LCD, you can pick your actual plays with the football titles and other sports titles. So when you play competitively, on couch co-op, no player that you played with could see the plays you picked via the screen like it was traditionally done to that point. You can actually just look at it privately on that little view screen. And it's something that was not only innovative, but it was masterfully implemented. And it was something that, till this day, all sports games and controllers still cry out to have that existing technology to bring forth the same ability that it gave you back then on the Dreamcast. Something that was superior and from anything you've ever seen as far as the accessibility of being able to play without no one knowing what you're going to do and your next step. Dreamcast was a console that if every real gamer at the time knew that what they were getting was special, unique, something that was never been done before by a company that had been through so much hardship and so much failures with trying to do innovation way too fast, way too early, where people were not ready and accepting the changes because they were costly. Things like the Sega CD expansion for the Sega Genesis and what continued to be the 32X expansion for the Sega Genesis, because Sega felt that people that owned the Genesis, since it sold so well, didn't have to feel obligated or forced to have to go out and buy a brand new $400 Sega Saturn machine to experience 32-bit if they felt so invested to stay on the Genesis platform because it was so successful and it still had so many games coming out. So It was called options. Options that Sega was trying to give, and at the same time, obviously, trying to make some money while trying to do right by the consumer by giving them those options. Of course, bad marketing and Sony's having a big purse of power, being a powerhouse electronic company, movie house at the time, and also publishers for games. Once they got into the market, they were able to bring in the PlayStation without having to worry that they didn't pay for the R&D whatsoever, and continued forward with that, and even brought it out for $100 cheaper and adding a more modern 3D chip to give you better full motion video quality and even some sharper image on some of the games, because they were already had the type of money that they did not have to worry about taking a loss and cost with the release of their console. And that ultimately ended up hurting Sega, because Sega did not have that type of money to fight back with all the losses that they had concurrently. And thanks to Bernie Stollarz getting and putting the foot in and the work to the release of Dreamcast to help out the American market, which then came and got replaced by Peter Moore. Peter Moore, the masterful genius that he is in business and with gaming and how much he cared for the gaming culture, he helped make the Dreamcast be the most successful launch of a console in console history. For me, and for many, the Sega Dreamcast is the greatest console ever released. And the reason for that is because not only was the most cheapest, the most powerful, the most innovative with things like the VMU technology, built-in modem for online play, which has never been done before, built into the console. It was also the first console to house the biggest launch titles, the biggest launch library titles in a launch history. It had about 15 to 17 titles, maybe even 19, that were for the most part solid or above average. Okay? It really didn't have anything that felt kind of cheap. And if it was cheap, it was still to a mediocre standard. So it did very well as far as what it brought to the table right from launch. So when you pay for your games, what you got was a big bang for your buck with the titles it was offering. And this included new IPs as well. And the price point. The price point and marketing was magnificent. It was stellar. It was top notch, second to none. So for that, I commend Sega. But what I say to you, the sad part was real gamers couldn't save it. Well, that comes from the experience that I saw with my own eyes. As when I started to see the Sega had the success, shortly after, not only maybe a week or two after, Sony saw that they weren't releasing PS2, the successor of PlayStation 1, anytime soon. There were just ramblings going on and talks, but nothing really cemented in final form. So what they did was they released they dropped the price point to the PlayStation 1 to $100. And then they also announced the release of Final Fantasy VIII coming soon, which was the successor to the biggest hit they had at that time with games like Final Fantasy VII, which was a tactical move because they saw that Sega was getting the limelight. So not only did they do that just a week later, about 2 weeks later, they announced next year we'll officially release PlayStation 2 and gave a chart with the supposed specs that the PS2 was supposed to perform and deliver on paper, which for the most part was all a vertical slice. Nothing really was what they promised. Obviously, to a certain extent. So, what happened was the real gamers that were there from the beginning, from back in the Atari, and the arcade era, and the Sega era, and the NES era, we went out and embraced this console, and we were happy and hoping that this will be the beginning of a long-term relationship, not only with Sega and its fans, but in the hardware industry, which they have been absent with no success for the whole generation of the PlayStation 1. And what ended up happening was, because the PlayStation 1 brought in so many new players that were mainly casuals, they were buying the console because it was the popular thing to have and the it thing to do, and everybody was talking about it, even in, big sites and on TV, because it was selling so successfully. The casuals held back and said, I'm not going to buy another console if I know that the PlayStation 2 is coming out in just a year and it's going to be 3 times and 4 times more powerful than the Dreamcast. Mind you, the Dreamcast had delivered a launch that you've never seen so strong before in any history of any launch console before it. And the price point. The price point was very consumer friendly. So any real gamer did not hesitate. So for those who did not, those were the ones that showed you the true colors of what type of gamer they were. And that's why I say it's sad that real gamers could not save the Dreamcast. Because shortly after that announcement of the PS2, about a year and a half's time, Sega decided, well, we can no longer continue to compete because third-party publishers decided to stop supporting the games and the console. They all jumped afloat with what was coming up on PlayStation 2 because it had the 124 million install base of PS1 migrating over, and the potential to sell more there of copies of their game was honestly, basically, based off the numbers, made perfect sense. No real gamer at that time gave 2 craps that PlayStation 2 was coming out, even if they were excited that the PS2 was a thing. They cared that they were getting another fantastic console with so much power that they've never seen before at the price point it was given, with the innovation and the library that it was offering. And these are things that you don't hear many people try to talk about. They sugarcoat it and say that it was all Sega's fault, Sega's fault, Sega's fault. Where the reality is, if you were there, just like I was, and saw with your own eyes, which you guys out there know, if you were in my position, you know exactly what I'm talking about. They didn't care. They chose to wait and opt not to buy because they felt that the hardware of choice was going to be the PS2. No real gamer worries about what's coming out. They worry about what's there at present time. So, to those guys, thank you for ruining what could have been possibly one of the greatest consoles of its generation. And I can't blame you, because that's what makes you casuals. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go in and show some of the games, get a little closer, that I own, that were big hitters and that were awesome and still this day still hold their own on the Dreamcast, to see if any of you shared the same memories that I might have shared with some of these games, just to give you guys an idea of how good these games really were and what the library had to offer. And also, we'll talk about why those 2 consoles next to it were kind of the birth father, the Dreamcast was, to those 2. So, let's move right in forward now. Get some better lighting, get these things out of the way, and here we'll go get a better angle so that you guys can see what we're looking at. Let's turn on the light, just for, or the TV rather, just for fun. Now, the reason why I say that the Dreamcast was the birth father to the Xbox OG and even the Xbox One and the 360, to be honest with you, is because Sega had established a very strong relationship with Microsoft. As a matter of fact, the OS for the Dreamcast was Windows SE, which was created by Microsoft just so they can have running the Dreamcast games that were compatible online. And to be honest, the real word was, according to what Peter Moore said in several interviews, that they were trying to do a deal with Sega when Sega decided to get out of the hardware business with the Dreamcast to create a successor, which was running on their new arcade motherboard, which was the Hakiro or Hichiro, if I'm not mistaken. I'm probably pronouncing it wrong, which is the chip that actually runs and is inside the Xbox One, which later became obviously titled the Xbox One and rebranded because they didn't work out. And with that deal, what ended up happening is Sega did a deal with, Microsoft to release 15 or 13 exclusive games and titles exclusively for the Xbox One console. And the birth of Xbox came to be, which transitioned all the ideas that were on Dreamcast, meaning running on powerful hardware with built in online capabilities, built in hardware, built in innovations that migrated over to the 360 and obviously now to the Xbox One. Thank you, Microsoft, Windows, for supporting Sega at their most desperate times that allowed them to have one last hurrah and success with the Dreamcast. So, I'll just show you a few of my titles. I had games here like Spawn, which was from the arcade. Street Fighter Third Strike. Perfect arcade port of the existing Street Fighter 3 game. The continuation and birth of Sega Virtual Tennis, which then transitioned into Sega Sports 2K2 series, which was phenomenal, which started in the arcades. Power Stone 2, the sequel to a brand new IP and fighter from Capcom, which this one presented a 4-player co-op capability. The sequel to games like DOA from Tecmo. Perfect arcade transition of the title, and it was a graphical showcase and showpiece. As you see there, does that look familiar to you? The beautiful Ooh La La from Space Channel 5. And as you see, it had this type of, I forgot what it's called. It makes her look like she's dancing with the little alien creatures in the back. Which part 2 also featured, I believe, Michael Jackson. May he rest in peace. They did ports of Star Wars Episode 1 Jedi Battle Power Battles, which is a hack and slash beat 'em up that was done on PS1 and then ported to the Dreamcast, which was running at a higher resolution with higher frame rate. Nice little mediocre titles, but that felt like a extension of games like Golden Axe from other companies, like here from Red Orb, Soul Fighter. The birth of one of Phantasy Star's most renowned and loved titles of all time, Phantasy Star Online, which also, if you see there, came with a demo of Sonic Adventure 2, the successor sequel to Sonic Adventure 1 with the launch of the Dreamcast. Geiger Wings 2, another amazing shooter, which had the first one as well on Dreamcast as well, which I used to have but got rid of. And this game here is amazing using the Naomi board, which was also in the arcade, which I believe only came out in Japan. We have 18 Wheeler, another arcade classic where you drive trucks and you take freight and learn how to drive and load up. Really fun. A lot of arcade fun. Games like Capcom versus SNK. Another crossover that was never done before, but was running beautifully on the Naomi board. Especially when they saw the success of Marvel versus Capcom 2. And here you go. Soul Calibur, one of Sega Dreamcast's true masterpieces, which you can also now play on Xbox Live and I believe PlayStation's PSN Network as well, via backwards compat on the Xbox One and on the Xbox Store from Namco. A graphical showpiece as well. Heavy Metal, one of the games that I said that is a battle-based hack and slash and beat 'em up arena battler, kind of like in the same vein that they're doing now with the game Bleeding Edge from Ninja Theory. This was called Geomatrix, and this was also from Capcom, as you see there. This is one of the first games who started that. Then we have other games like the popular and ever loved Unreal Tournament from Epic Games, which I believe Cliffy B worked on. This was only available at the time in things like a PC, because the only place that you could do that online gaming was on PC at the time. Sega Marine Fishing. This was a spiritual successor to Sega Bass Fishing. This was just took place in the open ocean as opposed to smaller lakes and ponds like Sega Bass Fishing. Project Justice, another amazing game that was 2D with 3D. That was also the sequel to another game that was on PlayStation 1 by this, was called Street Justice. I forgot the name of the other one, but this is like the spiritual successor and sequel, also by Capcom. Wonderful game, which was in the arcade, and it was an arcade port. Sonic Adventure, the first Sonic foray into the 3D realm, with Sonic that was beautifully running at high speeds with beautiful colors and beautiful graphics. Amazing, amazing launch title. Confidential Mission, another amazing title that was delivered from Sega, an arcade title to be exact, that was ported over, and this was done and developed by one of Sega's in-house, which I can't see right now and find where it is, but it's an arcade title. It's a railgun shooter like House of the Dead and Ghost Squad. And what do we see there? There you have it. None other than Beat himself from Jet Set Radio. Beautiful to see all these years later. Fantastic. Wonderful. A brand new iconic character that was born on the Dreamcast. Power Stone 1. Classic. Many nights of sleepless nights, rather, playing with your friends. Power Stone changed the game on a 3D playing field in a battle race arena style fighter, which was still to this day hasn't really been brought back. This game should really be returned from Capcom. Another arcade game. And obviously the big, big, big property from Sega. This was almost arcade perfect, 100%. I would say 97% arcade perfect. Running on Naomi, Virtual Fighter 3, still one of the best fighters in history in the 3D realm to date. One of the best racing games with the best control physics and best graphics ever seen in a console at that time. Test Drive's Le Mans 24-hour racing. Another fantastic game from Infogrames. Probably my all-time favorite hack and slash of all time of that era. Sword of the Berserk, Guts Rage, based on the popular manga and anime from the 80s with Guts. Overrated or underrated, should I say, game that was never really given enough love, and the sequel stayed only later on PlayStation, which I felt far inferior to this version. And this was done and developed by none other than Ukes and Eidos, the people who do the wrestling game, for those who don't know, when they used to do other things. Echo the Dolphin, Echo the Dolphin, Defender of the Future. One of the most beautiful games I've ever seen on any console at that time. This was definitely a graphical showpiece and a beautiful entry and sequel to the Echo universe and mythos. A game that many to this day didn't even play. Beautiful game. Also, the success and spiritual successor and sequel to the arcade game Dynamite Cop, which was called Die Hard Arcade. This is called Dynamite Cop. 4-player co-op, also arcade port running on Naomi. Like I did a video on, the best baseball game, in my opinion, with the best mechanics that didn't get a fair shake and still, holds up very well to this day. World Series Baseball 2K1. The side story of House of the Dead, Zombies Revenge, one of the best arcade beat 'em ups of that time. 3-player co-op, an arcade port of the game, which was awesome and ran perfectly almost on the Dreamcast. And the big behemoth of all, the most popular arcade game of that era, Marvel vs. Capcom 2, that today, to the standards, people hold it and regard it as the best 2D side scroller of its time and in this genre. Sega Smash Pack, which was a really nice, compilation of Genesis games with a few arcade games never released before that were never seen, like, as you see here, Virtual Cop 2, that was never released before, and I forgot what was the other one, but it was a collection of Genesis games on Dreamcast running at a much smoother and higher resolution. The original Sega Bass Fishing. Another innovative peripheral they brought out with a fishing rod that had no wire on the front of it. You just connected it and it felt like you were actually fishing, and it yanked and gave you force feedback. And it was just loads and loads of fun. To this day, it's one of the most fun games I played on Dreamcast. And yes, I know it is fishing. The creme of the creme football game that started it all. The NFL 2K series. This is one that I loved very much. 2K1. Probably the best football games in history. Made by Visual Concept, which they lost the license and rights to make them because EA bought out the NFL license, having more money than Sega and Visual Concept because they brought out competition like none other and made better games than them. In another slime ball move. Rayman 2, a 3D, the great version of Rayman from the 2D that it jumped from Saturn. And this was also on PlayStation 1. This was a superior version, obviously, called The Great Escape. The exclusive until they made a port on PS2 years later. This one still runs much better. Code Veronica. One of the selling points in why people should have gone out and bought a Dreamcast, because it was only there and it moved Resident Evil leaps and bounds beyond what we've seen on the PlayStation with the originals. A port of Resident Evil 2, very cheap port, but still a better rendition than the one on PS1. Same thing like Resident Evil 2, a better version of the game, which I never touched until the new one remastered that they just did for this generation, and I've owned it all this time. But it was also kind of a cheap port. Another arcade exclusive that was brought over called Outrigger, which is just like in the same vein as Bleeding Edge from Ninja Theory. An arena-based shooter where you use the environments 4-on-4 and is very fast-paced with melee and guns. And online play, as you saw there. Draconis, an action-adventure hack and slash in the vein of something like Conan or Lord of the Rings. Very, very fun game. Kind of rough in the gameplay because it was very big and very ambitious for the time, made by Crave Studios, but nonetheless still a fun title. The sequel to the launch game, Ready to Rumble, this one was far superior, so it was kind of felt more like a director's cut of the first one, so I got rid of the first one and just kept part 2. Amazing game, fun, simple, but a lot of fun that felt like Sega's version of Punch Out. Crimson, Death Crimson OX, a game that came out in Japan. The port was kind of cheaply done, but it was a nice railgun shooter. Very, very kooky, very crazy and out there. Made by Sega, well, Sammy Entertainment, which is now part of Sega, but an awesome arcade port, even though it was a little bit not polished. Cannon Spike, one of the best overhead shooters in history. One of the most fun games with Capcom characters like Charlie, Cammy, and as you see back here, things like I forgot her name from Project Gotham. There was nothing but characters from I mean Project Justice from Capcom games and a shooter where you had different environments but it was isometric from the top down. But it was a whole lot of fun and it was an arcade game. Running on Naomi as well. Perfect version. Or near perfect. Hydro Thunder. A game that was in the arcade 6 months before the launch and it was available at launch on Dreamcast. And it looked even better than the arcade version graphically. It did the same thing Soul Calibur did. Amazing game. This IP is now owned by Microsoft. And this was from Midway. Another rendition that looked gorgeous from Daytona, USA, based off the original with a bunch of tweaks. It was kind of trying to do a mix between 1 and 2 that were in the arcade. The difference is the gameplay with the analog was a little bit rudimentary and it didn't have that polish that it needed. That felt so epic and iconic to this day that you saw in the arcades. King of Fighters Evolution, one of the best fighting games from that era from SNK, using the Naomi board with the Naomi board technology. The background was all in 3D, and the characters were all drawn in sprites with animations of like you were watching an anime, kind of like what you see with Guilty Gear today with Art System Works. This is a really good and underrated Sega Dreamcast fighter. This was a really beautiful top-down isometric 3D Pac-Man game with Miss Pac-Man, Maze Madness. It was loads of fun. Pac-Man introduced with actual big sprites, level-based worlds where you did the same type of gameplay, but it had a lot of nice added gameplay mechanics, and it was beautiful running in high resolution in 480p and in 60 frames. It was amazing. Fun little game. And then, of course, we have the most expensive game ever made at that time and in gaming history, Yu Suzuki's Shenmue, which many people that claim they're Shenmue fans now, didn't ever play this game because they're on PlayStation, defending the fact that it's on PlayStation consoles exclusively when this game was born on the Dreamcast, the console that those same PlayStation fans said they weren't going to get at that time because it wasn't worth it, because it wasn't as powerful as what the PlayStation 2 was going to deliver for them. So that speaks volumes of how the hypocrisy started even way back when in the Dreamcast era. And my last title that I have, a beautiful rendition that started evolving the series, Alone in the Dark, the very first survival horror before Resident Evil, the very first one that started to mix those Resident Evil styles with a more photorealistic pre-rendered style like Resident Evil presented on the PlayStation 1, but with actual next generational graphics. This game then evolved onto 360 to start giving you set pieces where you controlled in real time with cinematic moments that then transitioned to other games and it was unified and copied by Naughty Dog with the Uncharted series, which people think it did first. You were driving on vehicles in real time. You would actually craft your weapons in real time. You would heal yourself in real time. You can do a first person and third person view in real time with the 360 version. This was the beginning start of the evolution of that game. And this was also published by, Infogram, or developed and then published by Dark Works, which was also ported then to the inferior PlayStation 1. So, guys, There you have it. One little thing I want to show you. Just give me 1 second. Okay, guys, just a point of reference so you guys can visually see it. Here is what the VMU looked like. And if you turn it this way, you can actually play the games with the little D-pad and the buttons here. And then you turn it this way, popped off the actual cover, and then you would take, as you can see, I have a family of controllers because it gave you a reason to buy multiple controllers with the 4 ports in the front. And these are the neon color translucent series. And you slide it in, and when you played it right there, as you can see, you slide it into these expansion ports, you would see everything there digitally. It would turn right on. And that's what the back looked like, with some nice triggers on each side and a nice analog there with a traditional D-pad. So, just so that you guys can see what the VMU looked like. So guys, I know my video is not presented to you in a high quality professional fashion or way. But what it is presented to you and how it is presented to you is with love and accuracy of what was going on as a real gamer and a root gamer that was there in that era, that I was living there in that era and saw what was going on. And I saw the success and growth and the demise of the Dreamcast console due to mudslinging and carelessness from the gaming community and companies, gaming community casuals or so-called gamers that were more casuals than anything at that time, and from companies like Sony who just used their power and money to shine all the light on them, meanwhile hurting others. Unlike Microsoft, that to this day try to help save developers and IPs and help other studios with their problems to make gaming continue to grow and go forward. Thank you guys for watching. I hope you like it. Let me know what you think in the comment down below. Give me your like or dislike with a thumbs up or a thumbs down. Share it with someone you think might like it. And as always, you know how you can help me in any way, shape, or form. If you love what I do and want to help me out and further my channel, it's down in the description. I don't have to tell you anything. It's not forced. It's all from you and your heart. Here, we're family, and that's what I consider you. You never has to feel obligated to do anything for me. I had a great time doing this for you, and I hope you guys had a great time watching it and sharing my thoughts, my video with you. Keep it gaming, guys. Happy birthday, Dreamcast, and thank you to all those people that made it possible and did something very special at a time where gaming felt like it was starting to plateau and hit a drought. Dreamcast revived it again and moved it forward. Love you guys. Bye-bye.